Hello, Captain John Engel. We wanted to thank you for your service and for taking the time to share your story.
My name is Erin Spees, and I, along with Betsy Marsh, will be conducting this interview at New Canaan High School on November 10th, 2017.
So the first thing we were wondering was, what was your life like before you got enlisted?
Well, I didn't enlist. I was commissioned as an officer, and I would say honestly, I was a reluctant one. I applied to Annapolis, and I got in. And I thought, okay, I like ships and boats, but I didn't pass the I waiver. So I said, all right, I'm going to go to Davidson College. And I was an English literature major, took a lot of art history courses, and I took ROTC because they would pay for college. And at the very end of college, the Army said, we'll take you, active duty, full time. And I said, but you've got so many better officers here in the ROTC program, people who want to make a career out of this. I'm just going to go up to Wall Street and get a normal job in business like the rest of my college graduates. And they said, no, no, we take you. And I said, really? I'm a literature major. I'm not the best soldier. And they said, no, no, we see something in you. God knows what it is. And they've chosen you for active duty. So we're going to send you to Arizona, to the Military Intelligence College. We're going to train you with a top secret security clearance, and then we're going to send you to Germany. And I thought, well, what's the harm in that? This is the end of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall is coming down. We're not likely to fight the Russians and have a war in Germany, so this won't be so bad.
So was military intelligence something that you were able to pick, or is that something that they assigned to you and telling you that they wanted you to join the Army?
That's a great question. So for a reluctant officer, I said, if I have to do this, then give me something that's applicable to ordinary civilian life. Give me a desk job. Give me military intelligence, give me the transportation corps, teach me about logistics, teach me a finance corps, teach me about finance, teach me something that I'm going to be able to use. Because remember, if we look in the rear view mirror, we hadn't had a war in 20 years. We were not likely to have another war in 1990. We hadn't had a war since Vietnam. And when we looked in the rear view mirror at Vietnam, we said, that's not something we want to repeat. We're not going to get bogged down in a land war in Asia in my lifetime. There's no way. And with the Russians dismantling the eastern front of Europe, it was even less likely.
So was there any special training that you had to go through? As you mentioned, you had top clearance. So was there any security measures that they had to brief you on, or specialized training for your position in the military intelligence branch?
The Military Intelligence College is fascinating. So in military intelligence, they teach you the enemy playbook. They teach you all about their equipment. They teach you about the Russians, and they teach you the Russian playbook and all of the other armies around the world that use it. The Iraqi army happened to be one of them, using the Russian playbook. The North Koreans also use Russian doctrine. The East Germans also use Russian doctrine and equipment. So they teach us about all of the different enemies, and your job as a military intelligence officer in a staff position is to advise the commander on what the enemy is going to do next. So when you get intelligence reports from the field, forward observers say, we spot 4 vehicles and of this type and moving at this rate of speed, a military intelligence officer's job is to deduce what that means. Oh, that's the advanced guard of a mechanized division, and then to extrapolate the entire enemy picture based on how they fight. So that was what I was trained to do out in Arizona, and what I was practicing war games in Germany at Grafenwehr and Hohenfels, big tank battles in the German forests using the Russian playbook.
So you obviously were not on the field at that point in time. How difficult was it for you to adapt to this new environment?
You mean the desert environment?
No, even your military
environment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, see, I think, again, I was a reluctant soldier. I was not adapting. I always thought that this was just a temporary moment in my life, and that as soon as this little patch of my life was over, I could get back to my real life. I could go back to graduate school. I could go get a job. You know, I could be a productive member of society. I mean, being in the military after 20 years of peace and not having had a significant war for the defense of the nation since World War II meant that, in my mind, a life or career in the military would be a waste of time.
So what did you think that you were leaving behind? Did you have family? Was there anything you had wanted to do before going to the military?
I just thought, you know, I could be training my whole life and doing war games in whether it was the German forest or back in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for a war that was never going to happen. So you have to think that, you know, we're now in a period of time where we actually do send troops overseas and have been for your whole lives. But when I was your age, we had not done that. The only conflicts we ever had in Panama and the Falkland Islands and Nicaragua, I mean, these were tiny little conflicts that would last, you know, a weekend. So it was inconceivable to me that we could go to war.
Did your ROTC training match what you did in your real service, or did you find that it was completely different?
Yes, but perhaps in an unexpected way. So while I said, I thought, and even while I sat there in the desert, playing chess, reading, thinking this is such a waste of time, I have to say that the training I could not have gotten anywhere else. In the ROTC training, they teach you, make a decision, Lieutenant, make a decision. They put you in charge of 20 people, and they say, go to the other side of the forest. And when you get halfway through the forest, they pop a bunch of grenades around you, and they say, what are you going to do? And so they teach you, unlike any other place I can think of, to make a decision with the best information you have at the moment, to evaluate a situation, develop an operations order, communicate that order, develop a hierarchy of control, command and control, signal, logistics, do all of that, meet the deadline. They teach you a way of thinking in ROTC, and then you practice that way of thinking in the military, and the training is awesome. They're very good at it.
And how did you feel being responsible for all the people you were telling to do these strategies? Did you feel responsible for their lives? Did you ever think you were doing the wrong thing, or?
Well, so in Germany, my German experience, I was way down on the totem pole of staff officers. I worked for a captain who worked for a colonel who worked for a general, and the general I had never met. And I was just a little tiny cog in this great big machine of staff officers, and would just do what my captain said and keep, you know, and keep quiet. And that was to stand in front of a map and say, okay, what we've seen is this, this, and this enemy, and so therefore, and to point out, and then I would hand the baton to I was the S2, or the assistant S2, and the S3 would say, therefore, we're going to mobilize in an envelopment action, and we're going to do the following. So it'd be like the defensive coordinator and the offensive coordinator on a football team. And I guess I was the defensive coordinator. But I was way down low. I didn't have anybody working for me. And then one day, in August, I guess, August of 1990, Saddam invaded. By September, we had sent troops down, but that was still not going to affect me. I was defending Germany from the Russians. By December, they decided that they would take assets from my division out of Germany to help with the war. And I thought, well, that's fine. They'll probably take tanks, and that doesn't affect me. I'm a military intelligence officer. But at the very last minute, they said, we're going to send a military intelligence company, the 101st MI Battalion, and we have fired the captain, and we've plucked this captain out of staff, and we've fired the lieutenant, and we've plucked you out of staff to replace those two, and you're going down next week. And so I led a platoon of 40 people in my platoon within a company of about 100 called a collection and jamming platoon, with 3 collecting assets that would put an antenna up and triangulate on enemy signals on the front lines, and therefore, with 3 of these, 2 or 3 of these arrayed on the front lines right behind the tanks, we could triangulate on enemy signals and tell you what they were saying and where it was coming from in case we wanted to bomb it or listen to it. So that was the first time, to answer your question, that I had 40 people working for me. And I was a 21-year-old, not much older than you, with no experience leading a platoon. And yes, I did feel very responsible for these because I didn't feel prepared myself for what we were going to face. How long we were going to be there, I don't know. What equipment will we have? I don't know. What will we be asked to do? I don't know. Will we be safe? I didn't know any of these things. I was just joining a war in progress.
So you mentioned that you felt responsible for your new platoon, as obviously you had never had experience leading this many men. How did you and anyone else in your position deal with the pressures that this might have put on you in a time where you did need to be on your top game at all potential times?
Why don't we go through the slides, and then I can talk about the different kinds of responsibilities I had at different stages in the war. So this first slide just shows that I was part of the 101st MI Battalion, which was part of which is a few hundred people in a battalion, in the 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One, and that's about 20,000 people. And the 1st Infantry Division of 20,000 was part of 7th Corps, which is probably 100,000, and we had, I would estimate, 300 or 400,000 because we had 3 or 4 corps in the desert. And I went down there on or around December 15th, 1990, and stayed till May 15th or so of 1991. So the first thing that you can see on this map is that you have the Gulf. And the Gulf was why Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait in the first place. He decided that he was going to take over Kuwait because he had just fought a very expensive war with Iran over 8 years. He needed their oil fields, he needed their oil revenue, and he needed a deep water port. And they had both of those things. And he said, well, Kuwait's been part of Iraq for most of the last 1,000 years, so I'm just going to take back, kind of like the U.S. taking back Texas. Well, Mexico might have something to say about that, but we said, well, we're just taking back that which, belongs to us anyway. So when we went down there, we began to mobilize, at first, the 18th Airborne Corps, and we sent them in by planes. But pretty soon, we started sending in boat after boat after boat with tanks, big tanks. And as I said, hundreds of thousands of troops. And so we needed to arrive at those ports. And so the first responsibility was to keep my people safe in the port, living in warehouses until our stuff got off the boats. Then, once we, with the next, and then we were going to get that equipment out into the open desert. So this is us staging out into the open desert. That's a water buffalo in the front, which is a water tank. That's a made-up toilet and shower point behind it. So we were making out of plywood these toilet facilities and dragging them out to the desert and dragging water out to the desert and dragging all our equipment out to the desert. And that's what it looked like. That is what camp looks like in the desert. To the left, you see a larger tent, and that would have been the mess hall, or the large tent where you could actually have a meeting or eat. And then the smaller tent is a 4-man tent that you see in the center of the page. That's a 4-person tent that could have 4 cots around the outside and not much else. Very cold at night. And you see the Humvee to the right. I've spent most of the war, when you're on the move, you live in your vehicle. You don't really have enough time to set up a tent. So this would have been during the staging, the month or so of the air attack and of the preparation phase, where we lived in the open desert, about 25 miles from the Tap Line Road, about 3 or 4 miles from the Saudi-Iraqi border. And this is what it looks like without a sandstorm. And you spread the vehicles out in a large circle, like a wagon wheel, and you point them all outward, and you keep vigilance at anything that might be coming at you in the open desert. And you wait from roughly December 15th to January 15th, we waited to get our orders and to get the rest of the equipment and troops into the theater. And, well, now I've gone a little bit ahead of myself. So this is where we wait. We went and did so to answer your question, how do you feel responsible? Well, I was no more familiar with this strange place, these strange vehicles, and these strange responsibilities, and how was I going to take responsibility for the 40 troops under me? All college, graduate, Army language school, radio operators, high-tech education. They were all very smart people. We have a very smart, well-educated Army. I relied on my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Lamb. So I was the platoon leader with the officer rank, and I was dad, and he was mom. And he was the disciplinarian. You're out of uniform. You know, give me 10 push-ups. You need to be on, KP duty. Fix that radio. So he knew what jobs they had to do and when they needed to do them. And he was tough as nails. And so I found my role evolving to be that guy who used his rank and used his mobility, having a Humvee, to go get supplies, to go get spare parts, to make sure that we had our mail and that we had all the things that the platoon needed. So my responsibility as a platoon leader became a very good partnership with my platoon sergeant, and he did what he did best, and I took care of the rest.
So looking at these conditions that you've laid out for us with these pictures, they're obviously very different from what you would have experienced back home. Do you think that this had any effect on the morale of your soldiers?
Yeah, morale was pretty low. I kept a journal. I kept 2 journals during the war, and so I was rereading them, maybe for the first time in 27 years last night, to try and make sure that I got some of this was accurate today. And I can tell that we were, I don't feel like we thought we had overwhelming force, and we thought we were well trained and well positioned and all that. We were like, man, we're just sitting here, and wow, we're defending Kuwait. Where's Kuwait? And why is this important? And you want to play chess again? I don't know. What do you want to do? Yeah, I guess let's play some more chess. So you sit in the desert and you wait and you wonder why this doesn't feel like a monumental moment in history, but my country has asked me to do this for our ally, and 30 other countries have signed on. So I guess it's quite a bit different from Vietnam. I'm getting, according to this, I was getting 21 letters yesterday. I got another 10 letters. My mother was, getting kids at East School to write me letters. And so I thought, so was morale suffering? Not like it was in Vietnam, not even like World War II. This was a televised war. This was for the first time in 1990. We had 24-hour news channels for the first time, and they had to fill up 24 hours. And so they spent a lot of time keeping the American public, keeping my mother, keeping my girlfriend informed as to what was going on, better informed than we were. Because remember, we were in the open desert, and we didn't have Armed Forces Network radio. So the American public knew what was going on and perhaps felt that this was a rather important and momentous moment. We did not feel that way in the desert. But we didn't feel bad because we were getting the letters.
So you mentioned that a lot of your time, you kind of made it seem as though they had a lot of downtime, like you mentioned playing chess. How many moments would you say, were you in action that you had to quickly, leap into action? How many things were you not expecting that took you by surprise is what I'm trying to ask, I guess.
No, that's great. I think any war is characterized by hurry up and wait. And there's profound, long periods of waiting, and then very short moments of intense activity. And that was true here. And so we waited in the desert, and then they said, okay, here's a sand table, and they drew a map on the, and they said, okay, so here are the minefields, and here are the obstacles, and the tanks are going to go, and and the engineers will breach the minefield, and then they will pass through in a single file line, and that's what we did, and then they will spread out on the other side, and we will move through the open desert. And so let me go back to a map. So the yellow path is the path we took, and it was the envelopment. So the U.S. game plan was to put a bunch of Marines in the east against the coast and the Navy and make it look like we were going to attack from the water and from the east. And we were going to attack from the south northward into Kuwait City. Instead, we put a few 100,000 troops out in the middle of the desert and followed that yellow path and sent massive amounts of, and so we breached the minefields at the border, and then we, for 3 days, to answer your question, of intense moving, passed through, let's see if I can find, so passed through the enemy defenses, and this is what they looked like. So I can remember it. I can remember it right now because we had a single file line through the desert, and we were like, and it would stop, and I would get out of my Jeep, and I would probably swear, and I'd walk up to some Jeep where the driver had fallen asleep, and I'd bang on the head, get going, we're gonna miss the war, and so he'd put the deuce and a half, and chug along at 5 miles an hour and follow the tanks. So I remember, it was like 3 days without sleep, and we're just chugging along. And if we stop, the 100,000 troops behind us all stop. So don't fall asleep, right? Meanwhile, you see the tanks in front of you, especially at night, and then and they're blowing up T-55 Russian-made tanks like the one you see in front of you. And then all these soft-skinned vehicles would pass in this line, and I would say, oh my God, step on it. If that thing blows up, it's going to go right through the canvas doors. And so I put a few more sandbags on the floor of my Jeep, and I get very anxious going by these things when they were on fire, because that was a dangerous thing. When my kids say, Dad, did you ever shoot at anybody? Did anybody shoot at you? If I was that close to the enemy, I was too close. These wars are designed to have tanks hitting things 1 mile and 2 miles in front of us while they're moving. So anything that was that close to me, I was not supposed to be that close. So no, I do not remember being shot at during the war. But coming in contact with these once they were on fire was pretty raw. Go ahead.
So did you have any interactions with the enemy or the native people of the lands that you were in that weren't all conflicts, such as like prisoners of war, or like how do I put this, like messages that weren't directly related to actual shooting?
Well, we had to work with the Saudi Arabian people in the port, and they were our allies, and they were very helpful at getting us what we needed. They were happy to see us. And then we, once the battle started, this is a picture, this is a slide of prisoners of war. And I remember the tankers, they would come through the desert like this, and the tankers would gather them the way you see them on the slide and say, I remember this quote, do whatever you MI guys do. Now that's the instruction I, as a 21-year-old, got. Now I had not gotten a great deal of training, if any training, in interrogation techniques. I don't know what us MI guys do in this situation. So we were making this up as we go along. And I was, keeping, in my journal right here, this is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the war plans, right? This is phase line cherry, phase line plum, so this is what we were reduced to, the greatest technology on the planet. We were writing on little notebook paper, and writing in our journal the passwords of the day. And so when they said, do whatever you MI guys do, it wasn't like they handed you a manual and say, here, this is how you interrogate, or this is what we expect of you. So I have to say, on the first day of interrogating these guys, very nervous, very worried that one of them was going to pull out a pistol and shoot, or worse, or a grenade. So I put security with M16s on both sides of the aisle. I separated them in the desert, 5 meters apart, and we found duct tape, and you put duct tape on their hands, and you duct tape it around, and you go to the next one, duct tape it around, and you're like, okay, now, secure. And I would say it only took 24 hours before we realized that none of these people really wanted to be there. They were not angry. They were not the enemy. They were there because Saddam Hussein had emptied the prisons, put every able-bodied man and some not so able-bodied on the front lines, and said to them, if you come back, I will kill you, and I will kill your family. So you will defend the front lines. So they did not want to be there. That was apparent. So after the first day, we did not even secure their hands and wrists. Pretty soon, we started giving them food because we started to take pity for them. We thought, we haven't eaten very well because we're just eating MREs out here in the desert. But they haven't eaten anything in weeks once we started to interrogate them. Oh, and the interrogator said, well, what do you want me to ask them? I said, we don't have a lot of time to interrogate people who don't want to talk. So if they don't want to talk, they're not going to talk. If they want to talk, I'll talk to them. So if you can find any of them who are officers, I'd really like to talk to them. But I'll talk to anybody who will talk to us. And they would say, oh, this guy will talk to you. And I'd say, ask them, when's the last time they ate? And they translate and they say, about a week or 3 days. Well, when's the last time they heard from higher headquarters? Oh, that's been like 4 days. Oh, okay. So when's the last time they were like resupplied? Oh, 2 weeks. And when you start to do the math, and pretty much as soon as we started sending in the air attacks, no trucks were rolling. Nobody was resupplying them. Then we started to ask them interesting questions like, so do you have chemical weapons? Where are the chemical weapons? And guys said, oh, I could tell you, we dug a hole in the desert and we put all the weapons, all the chemical weapons in the desert. And we're like, ooh, can you show me? And I'd spread the maps on my Jeep and say, but all the maps, of course, are like these big white pieces of paper with grid lines on them because the whole desert looks like that. So it doesn't really do you much good to show a guy a big blank piece of paper. I mean, he knows where he dug a hole, but he wasn't going to be able to tell me where he dug the hole. But we sent the intelligence upstairs. Don't know if they ever found the weapons.
Do you think they were lying about the weapons, or did you get that viewpoint from them, or did you think they were telling you the truth? Like, I know you said you could tell they didn't want to be there, but do you think they were more willing to be on your side than Saddam Hussein's side, or?
Well, so there was this fascinating thing. No, I don't think they were lying. They really did not want to be there. I want to show you these propaganda leaflets. So what they did is when they approached, they would pull these pieces of paper out of their boots with cartoons on them. Here's 2 examples, a black and white one and then the color one. And in I don't know if the camera can see this, but there's a cartoon of a United Nations soldier. And how do you know that? Because he's got like a United Nations flag behind him. That's always a good clue. A United Nations flag, and this guy's wearing an Iraqi helmet, and he's thinking about his family, and the UN soldier is giving him food. He's thinking about his family, and he's getting food. And then on the other one, it shows that he holds up this little piece of paper, and then the next scene, he's sitting down in front of a feast of food in the desert. This is what we were dropping out of planes. They pulled these out like it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. They're like, this is the deal. This is the deal. You're not going to shoot me. Because they had been told by their own government that we were going to shoot them. I have a piece of Iraqi propaganda that shows, here's a leaflet that shows a U.S. fighter jet with United States flag coming out of the tailpipe, and it's bombing. And it looks like a horrible scene of destruction. So they had been told that the Americans were just monsters, and the Americans are going to roll over you and kill you all. And so it wasn't just fear of deserting the front lines, but it was fear of us. And then when we dropped these get out of jail free cards, they said, oh, okay, so these guys are really not our enemy. They're not going to shoot us. And we didn't. And so, you know, we said, go home.
So how would you say that fighting, both behind the scenes as a military intelligence and if you faced actual combat, influenced your view of the war and the world itself afterwards?
I have to say, you know, before the war, before we had a war, I thought, there's no way we're going to have a war, and this would be a complete waste of time. In the war, I thought, okay, I'm going to wait, I'm going to do my job, and it's on TV, it's very well scripted, we have all the equipment and you know, what we need, we're going to do this thing, limited objective, and we're going to get out of here. When you read in the journal, and you see that after 3 days of invading into and getting into Kuwait, and basically, let's see if I can, there. So we finally stop in Kuwait, and we go into Kuwait City, and it's been abandoned by the Iraqis. And so there's no reason that the Kuwaiti people can't come home, and we are done our job. And I watched the helicopters go overhead, and I read in the journal, it said a flood, it says in the journal, a flood of Chinook and Apache helicopters went up to go sign the armistice. And I remember being mad, and everybody in my unit was mad. We're like, what do you mean? What? After 3 days, you're going to stop us? We should go up to Baghdad and basically take out the rest of his army and take out Saddam Hussein. I can't believe they're stopping us. You know? I mean, you know, if you're on like a winning football team, right, and you know, and you're like, come on, put me in the game, coach. You know, I mean, you know, and what do you mean we're going to slow things down or we're going to stop? We're winning. It was inconceivable to us. You could be of two minds on that. On the one hand, we were right. We had to go back in many, many years later and go back in and fight with Saddam Hussein again. Some people would say, no, we didn't need to go back and fight him a second time, and we left things far worse than we thought. All I know was that in 1991, with Vietnam in the rearview mirror, a long and protracted war. We were determined not to lose sight of the original limited objective, which was not regime change in Iraq. It was to restore Kuwait to the Kuwaiti people and go home. And so my answer is, at the time, I admit I was mad at the limited objective. On the other hand, I was wrong. The limited objective was a good thing in 1991 because we got a coalition of 36 nations to agree with us on that. We did that, and if we had gone any further, we might have been on our own.
So were there any specific experiences that you can pinpoint that you really think affected you even for years after you left the war?
I can tell you that seeing a dead body, you know, right up close for the first time. I mean, I got to tell you that, remember, this is the beginning of the age of video games. Everybody had a Game Boy, right, in the company, and then we were playing our Game Boys, and we were and we had, you know, this was in the 80s when you had video games coming out, Pac-Man, and the whole war was far away. If you were watching it as an American on CNN, you know, it was you were watching bunker busting bombs from overhead, tracking like a video game. So my point is, it was very impersonal, right? It was all just like at arm's length. Remember I told you the tanks were hitting things 2 miles away. So then to come across these tanks and encounter a dead body for the first time was really, so I'll remember that even now. There weren't many of them, but when you see your first, you know, dead body, it reminds you how horrible war can be, and it's a lot different from a video game. an impersonal experience.
So, of course, you interacted with the people, the prisoner of wars, but were there any significant interactions that happened between people there, civilians, generals, anybody that you still remember to this day?
So I'm going to show you a picture of, so this was pretty horrible. This was when Saddam was going to lose the oil fields. He set them on fire, and I went, and I do remember it was a scene like hell. I went there, and there were no people around. There were no vehicles around. The sky was black with soot. The ground was black like tar. And the only thing you could see were these flames of fire coming out all around you. And you thought, this is really horrible. But I wanted to show you about the interactions with the people. So the people came out from wherever they were hiding, and they were so thankful to see us. And there were so many Kuwaiti flags. And they really wanted to I flew a Kuwaiti flag off my Jeep, and everybody would beep and wave and smile and thumbs up as they went by. They were very happy that we intervened. This is the highway of death leading out of, so their nation had been looted and dragged out one vehicle at a time along that highway, and we came in and stopped those convoys, and Iraqis would drag the convoys to the side and keep it up. And here are the mansions along the beach that were fortified with sandbags and RPG rounds with the intent of mining those beaches. The beaches were mined, and in order to slow the Marines from coming up, and they were intent on slowing down the Marines and shooting the Marines, which they thought were going to be the main attack. I have to say that when we came into Kuwait City, we had some of that interaction with the very grateful people who got their country back. And these are the weapons, these are the torture devices that we found in those mansions. And so what had happened was the Iraqis had gone in, and they needed the money to finance their last war, and they looted what they could, but then they went house by house with tools and said, if you don't tell us where you've hidden your wealth, we're going to cut off a finger or worse. And so we found places that were designed specifically to torture the Kuwaitis. And it did make us feel much more justified, I guess, having found this and having found some of the atrocities.
So we're going to have to wrap it up a little bit, but we just wanted to know, do you remain in contact with any of your people? How does it affect you in your life today?
No, I don't. I have found one or two of the people in my platoon and found out how they're doing, over the years. But no, I look back at that and I say, I thought I had a plan for my life, and it didn't involve the Army and a war. And I was going to go to a good high school, Canaan High School, and college, get a good job. And this was, at the time, a huge distraction. I have to say that it was massively appreciated by the people in America. And over time, I grew to appreciate what I was trained to do, make a decision, Lieutenant, make a decision, and manage people, and evaluate a situation, and explain it to the colonel, and give an analysis, and convince him of a point of view. So I learned some great skills, just like going to business school. So you don't know what God's plan is for you. You don't know, and sometimes you just have to roll with it and trust that you'll come out the other side a better person. I think I came out of this war a better person, smarter, more compassionate, a better leader, and it prepared me for all the other things that was to come afterward.
So are there any life lessons that you learned in your time in the Army that you would like to impart on future generations?
Well, I don't know that it was particular to me, but I mean, this whole notion of officer, right? you wake up in the morning and everybody calls you sir, 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 sir. And you think, wow, I'm in charge. And I guess one of the life lessons is it takes more than a rank to be in charge, to get respect. So maybe one of the life lessons you learn is you learn how to be a leader. And I don't know that they teach you that in the ordinary classes in school. You have to pick that up as you go along. And in my case, I learned to be a leader, and I learned to get the most out of my platoon and my platoon sergeant in this sort of on-the-job training in this extraordinary circumstance. So, yeah, I think I did learn a lot, and it did make me who I am.
Do you have any advice in particular for those looking to serve?
I think that, again, you have to trust in God's plan. I think that you could say, oh, I want to be in the Army because I want to be an artilleryman and I want to fight war games, or I want to be in tanks or whatever. And you know what? You may not know what it is that you're going to learn in the Army, but you're going to learn something. You're going to learn leadership skills, communication skills, analytical skills, technology skills, as good or better than any business school. So I would say, yeah, it was worthwhile, although I didn't see it at the time.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming in today and for sharing your story with us.
We truly appreciate your service in helping our country and our people. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.